All right, welcome back to CriCri Aviation. My name is Jim Payne, and this is a completed horizontal stabilizer. And this is part two of the construction of the horizontal stabilizer. The first video ended up pretty long as far as getting all the internals of this assembly finished. So in this video, this is where we're going to cover doing the skinning and gluing process and all of the final finishing on the horizontal stabilizer. So stick around and we'll get a horizontal stabilizer finished. Yes, I'm building the world's smallest twin-engine airplane. Before I go any further with completing the metal rib portion of the center of the horizontal is I'm going to create the skin that's supposed to fit over the top of here that I'm going to use to figure out exactly where these notches or these slots need to be put into the sheet metal skin that covers the entire horizontal. There's a piece we're supposed to make that fits over the top of here that we can locate and mark on the final skin where to cut these slots for these bearing supports, but then also we're going to mark where the holes need to be drilled into these metal ribs and these 4 holes here for the bracket, the flight control bracket. And if you look at the manual here, this is what this kind of looks like. It's it's this piece right here. So what we need to do is bend something that's the same shape as the airfoil and cut it out and kind of fit it so that it fits between the fittings, and we can mark all of our holes and check our fit. I'm going to use that piece and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so it extends on either side, and I'm going to make it so that it goes to at least the foam rib on either side. I'm going to use that as kind of an alignment piece to determine how well this skin is going to fit on here. So I want it to go from at least here to here so I can see the pattern of it fitting around the ribs on either side, and then see how it fits in here. You know, if I have any gaps, if it's being pulled together, if it's sticking out. I think I'll be able to see a little bit better what's going on with these metal ribs and how good the fit actually is. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I have a scrap end of a piece of 16 thousandths aluminum from cutting out the that's the rudder skin, and what I'm going to do is cut the bottom off of this, and I'm going to use the bending procedure that they recommend in the manual and just bend this in half, and then start with that as a template to be able to cut these slots and see how this fit works out. So I'm going to cut this out real quick and bend it and see if we can make this fit. I cut out a scrap piece of 16 thousandths, and I just did a quick bend on it, just to show you how well this stuff bends and shapes using the methods in the manual, at least for the consistent flat parts, maybe not so much the rudder, but in the manual it recommends you use about a 12 millimeter stop, which I'm using a 1/2 inch piece of plywood. This is actually a metric plywood, I believe, so it is right around 12 millimeters, close enough. And what I did is I just measured from the end of my table here the width, or I should say the length end to end of the airfoil of the elevator, and just spaced it about out that distance. And then I took this piece, because this isn't as deep as the full elevator is. I used a shorter scrap, and I hand bent this around so that I could get the 2 ends to touch. I just held it down here in the corner, and then I took this big flat piece of board I had and I just rested on the end of my table and just squished this down, so that this kept this going further than that 12 millimeters or a 1/2 inch. And then I just took this over to the airfoil here. Let's see if I can show you what this looks like. But look, it fits absolutely perfect around the front of these ribs just doing that. It's amazing how simple something like that can be, and how well it actually works. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to position that over here, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can start marking and drilling and cutting out the slots and so forth for this, and then double check the fit over here. But I just wanted to show you that. That's what I'm going to use as my little test piece in the center here. So I marked the 2 fittings in the middle here, and what I tried to do is I cut a fitting hole on either end of this too, just to do a test fit, just so I could fit this down on the end here, nice and flat, and then I could just get past the rib here and double check the fit of the skin down around here to the rib, and then down around the bottom by the fitting to the rib. I think I'm being a little too picky with my workmanship here on these ribs, because this skin is going to fit perfectly fine across all of these. So I'm just going to keep going here, cut these 2 center holes here and move it over and test the alignment there. But I did check both of these ribs using the end of the skin here across the bearing and the fitting here, and yeah, it's going to work out just fine. So I'm not going to worry too much about the fitting of these at this point. I think they're going to be fine. I'm going to finish setting this up with the 2 slots in here and get my holes placed for all the holes that need to be drilled here in these ribs on both sides. And yeah, so I'm just going to keep working on this. I finished creating my template here, so I'll know where to mark these holes for the fittings and the bolt holes for the upper fitting on the actual final skin. The other thing I did on the other side here, also kind of a mess here, but I drilled and marked the rivet holes that need to go on the top side of the skin on this side. Let me show you here. Yeah, so there's got to be rivets in between each one of these little flutes on here that go through the top skin. So I've marked those on here and drilled them so that when I overlay the skin, I can mark those holes also on the top skin. Because once the skin's on, I'll never know where these ribs actually are, and I'll never know where my little flute marks are to make sure that I get a rivet, you know, in between those areas. So now that I'm done with that, I'm going to take this metal section apart of ribs, and I'm going to clean them all up. I'm going to get them all alodined, and I'm going to get them glued and pop riveted into place, because I'm basically done with this. So the next step after that is I need to take the skin that I already have cut out over here and go ahead and bend that using the same method I did here, and we'll get the holes cut in there, and we'll be getting pretty close to being ready to glue it on. I still have to go back and put the little shims in here of the foam material that has to cross over the spar. So I got some cleanup stuff to do, but we're getting really close to being able to glue this. So I've got the parts alodined for the 2 ribs that go in there. I did scuff away the allodyne from the areas that are going to be glued, because these do need to get glued and pop riveted into place. This fitting here also, we need to put the nut plates on the back, because this fitting here with the bearing that goes in it needs to be bolted onto the front. So I'm just going through and you know, attaching these temporarily so I can locate the holes and go ahead and drill the rivet holes for these. I drilled these holes in here exactly the same size as these bolts, so I feel confident that I can use these fixed nut plates in here by putting a bolt through there exactly in the center of the hole, get that aligned perfectly, drill the rivet holes and pop rivet those into place. I'll actually go back and, you know, if there's any tightness in the holes here, I'll just go 1 drill size higher just to open these holes up just a tiny bit more. But at least since the bolt holes themselves are exactly the right size, I can get these nut plates in exactly the right place. Now I could have used a floating nut plate like this. I try to only use these if I'm putting it in a place where something's going to be, you know, coming on and off once a year, an inspection panel, something like that. For something like this, it's going to be fixed. It's going to be bolted on really one time and shouldn't need to come off. That's when I'll be a little bit more precise and make sure that I get a solid, you know, fixed nut plate in there in those situations. But you could use either one. I don't know that there's any disadvantage in trying to use this here, but they cost a little bit more and they weigh a little bit more. So I just completed the gluing and pop riveting of these center ribs on the horizontal tail here. This is actually moving along pretty quickly. So while this was drying, I did cut out the straps that go on the bottom over these locations here, like so. There's one for each side. I still have to notch out the one on this side for the bearing so that it fits through. You actually have to make these so they fit through the bearing, and then they're supposed to be tight on the top and the bottom, or at least, you know, snug. And then you can leave a little bit of a gap on either side, but it's critical that they're tight between the top and the bottom, because what these straps are doing is they're being pop riveted through the skin, through these ribs, and it's actually providing a little bit of additional support to these bearing mounts, so that there's not any rocking back and forth. So there's just an additional strap that goes in there. One here, there's one that goes here. And really I'm at the point now where I can go ahead and start bending and fitting the skin onto here. So I just decided to do these while I was waiting for this to dry. But once I get those two parts done, we'll get the skin fit on here, and I'll go ahead and notch out the skin for these fittings, along with drilling the holes in here and then marking the rivet holes that need to go on the top side that I won't be able to see. The rivet holes on the bottom here are really determined by the holes that I've already pre-drilled in this strap. So wherever this strap lands here on top of this fitting, I'll be able to do a rivet along here. It'll be, you know, this is like an automatic guide for me. These pop rivets here just go through the skin, and then these here all go through the skin also. The one thing that we're going to change on the manual with these straps is that I am going to countersink these rivets in here. Primarily because I have seen issues on other CriCris where the fitting attachment here at this bearing point on the vertical fin will actually hit this rivet here if this one isn't countersunk. This part is thick enough, because this is 40,000ths, that really recessing or countersinking all of these rivets, in my opinion, is not an issue. You're not structurally changing anything. We should be able to countersink these instead of having above the surface rivets. So I'm going to do that on mine. I've seen other builders do that too. So, all right, so I'm going to finish notching out the other one of these, and then I'll get the skin out, and I'll see if I can get the skin bent so that we can start fitting that on here. I finished fitting these straps that are going to go on top of the skin after it's glued down. I did notice that I have to be a little bit careful here. This radius right here in this bracket, that sticks out above the skin surface of the vertical fin, and I noticed that when I was using the test panel that I'm placing over the top of this to drill the holes and so forth, that this creates a bump, because the skin will actually hit this before it gets all the way down to touching the ribs. And so I may have to notch a little bit out on either side of the skin to make sure that the skin fits completely flat across these ribs here. The other thing I'm going to have to watch for too is that when I put these straps on, that this strap is not sticking up. You can actually see it right here. Let me see. See how I can't get this strap all the way down because it's hitting that that radius down in there. So I may have to notch these straps out on the inside here and just make sure that that radius kind of flows into this. I don't think I'll have to go all the way through and notch it out on the front side or anything, but I am going to have to spend some time just kind of you know, using some small files like this to just make it so that that fits down in there, because I certainly don't want to bump on the skin there or on these straps. That's not going to be very structurally sound, and it's also going to make that skin come closer to these bolt holes and create even a more of an issue than I have already with the rivets clearing this. So in fact, I'm almost wondering if some of the people that have had problems with those rivets before is because they have created a bump here, putting the skin on and putting those straps on, and all of a sudden you're, you know, an 1/8 inch or 1/16 inch closer to those bolt holes. So that could actually be the reason. But that's one of the things I'm going to watch for when I'm putting the skin on here, and make sure that I get that notched out on the skin at least. These will cover the skin, and then I'll see how much I have to clear out of these when I put those on. I have the table here all set up. I'm just going to pour 5 gallons of iodine in here just to cover this sheet for a couple minutes. I just put blocks underneath near the table leg, so that once I'm ready to drain this, I can just prop up this side with the blocks underneath, and then I'll prop up the 2 corners so that it flows down to this end and down to the center. And then I'm just going to punch a hole right here through where the tables come together, and hopefully that'll drain back into my bucket. But we'll see. Hopefully I don't make too big of a mess here. Okay, so I finished alodining this panel and cleaned up my mess I had here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start bending this panel into the airfoil shape for the horizontal stabilizer. So underneath here I've got a piece of tabletop that I had that's almost exactly the same width as the skin here, and I've also got some plywood that I put on the end here, and this is 15/16 plywood, which is almost exactly 12 millimeters, or at least as close as I can get to it, because that's what we're going to use as our stop. So I'm going to see if I can get this on video while I do this, but what I'm going to do is pull this back, and I'm going to start by folding this sheet metal in half, just getting the two ends to touch, and then I'm going to clamp this side down with something, and then once I've got that done, I'll position these boards on the end, and then we're going to set another piece of this tabletop on top of here, and we're just going to squish this down. And what's going to happen is it's only going to be able to squish down the thickness, or down to the thickness of this 12 millimeter plywood, and it's going to stop. And then when it springs back, it's going to put a radius on the end of this corner that should match the airfoil shape on the horizontal stabilizer. And that'll happen all the way along here, and then we'll be able to just use this skin and position it on top of our ribs that we have, and we should be able to glue it down. So the reason I went and got a board is that if I try and fold this in half with just my fingers, I'm actually going to dent it. This stuff is so thin, if I push on it anywhere, I'm going to put little dents in it. So I'm hoping to use this to put over on top of it, so that as I put weight on it, it's not going to do it unevenly. Just so you know, I haven't done this before, so that's why I'm trying to kind of figure this out as I go. This is actually working pretty well, so let me just get this. We're just trying to get this thing down in half so that we can actually do the bending process, because until we get it positioned at least curved enough to get a board on it, we're not going to get very far. And this is actually working quite well, so I'm just pushing it down slowly, making sure I line the trailing edge up each time, just trying to put a little bit more pressure on it until we can get to the point where we can clamp this. A little bit more. As the radius gets smaller on the front, I'm just creeping towards the front. Alright, I'm going to say that I can clamp this now on the back here. Yes, I should be able to clamp this now. Hopefully. Alright, I just started putting a slight bend in it. Alright, so I'm going to clamp this on the back. Both edges right on top of each other. This alignment's really critical, so I'm going to get some clamps here. I just don't want. I'm a little concerned if I put these clamps in here without anything underneath it, that the clamps are going to dent the material. So I'm going to try and find something I can fit over the top of here and clamp it down without it being a big, 3-inch, 3.5-inch wide board. Okay, I've got some 16. These are the angles for the fuselage that need to be cut. I'm going to see if I can put one of these over and clamp down on top of this. Without hurting this. So we're going to need more than one set of hands. So I'm going to do this one more time. See if I can get this in here. Pull it down. Yeah, this will work. Let's see. Off a tiny bit. Of course, I gotta fix it. It's literally. Okay. I'm saying that's good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to position this about where we'll end up with when this gets pushed down, which is probably about here. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get another piece of tabletop and we're going to put it up against this stop that I've already got clamped in here, and we're just going to squish this down. Hopefully it works okay. I'm going to straighten up this a little bit more because I've got it angled in. And I'm using these tabletops because they're nice and flat. Not only are they flat, they're smooth, and they weigh a lot. So, okay. So how straight this is. That's okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to set this on top of that, like so. All right. Good. Okay, now I'm just going to put one more clamp down here. Keep it falling the right way. Like so. I'm going to grab the camera here and show you. I guess you can kind of see it on the end here. But yeah, this is what we're doing. And we're just going to squish it down. That then is going to take a little bit of effort. And what we're doing is going down until we hit that board. That's when we know we've got the right radius. Get close, but it's not there yet. Now I've hit it. Like that. Yep, that's it. Okay, well, pull it off and see how close it is. really know how well that fits until I get the, well, I guess I can put it on there. Let's put it on there. I haven't cut the holes yet, obviously, for the fittings, but I can test the rest of it. Test the front side of it, or top side of it. This stuff's amazing. So this looks very good. Let's see if I can get the camera back on here. So you can, we can't really see the top, but I mean, you can see it's just going to curve right around just like that. And you can see our hairfoil shape all the way down. There's no reason this shouldn't be good. What I can do, and it actually fits perfectly between my end plates here. What I am going to do is this. Let me slide it down. Oops, I'm going to break a rib. I'm going to slide this down till I'm at the end of a rib, close to it, without breaking them. Right, like this. Okay. All right, so now we can check the end. And this looks really, really good. Perfect. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start cutting the holes in here for the fittings, and then we'll get to the point where we can rubber band this down to some screws down on the bottom, and we'll get it completely fit on top of there. We'll get all the holes that we need drilled before we glue. And yeah, we're looking pretty good here. Okay, I'm getting ready to cut the holes in here. What I did is I took the skin off and I placed this back over the fittings. And I just made a measurement from the end of my form here all the way to the edge here. And I made another measurement over here all the way to the edge here, just to make sure that when I placed this on top of the skin, I got it in exactly the same spot, because I can't tell where it actually was. So I wrote those numbers down and I put a little pen mark measured with the ruler back over here on either side so that I can center this, you know, it's exactly where it needs to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this skin off here and put this on here in order to mark it, because I can't, it doesn't want to push this down easily, and we got to make sure that we get this as tight in here as possible. And then we actually do have to compensate for the skin thickness, because this skin is going to be moved, you know, that 16 thousandths ahead of where all these holes are. So I'm going to have to adjust these holes down that 16th or that 16 thousandths of an inch when I drill them, and I'll have to make sure that when I start notching these out that I put these a little bit, you know, just slightly lower than where they actually are. All right, now that I got the skin fit on here, what I'm doing is trying to finish up all the little things that need to be done on the inside of the structure before we actually glue it. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to cut these little filler pieces to fill on top of the spar in between each one of the ribs. I'm going to get those glued into place. I also have this spot here on the spar where I had to scuff away some of the allodyne to fix a little dent that I ended up getting in the spar web from my rivet gun. What I did is I picked up some zinc phosphate primer. So what I'm going to do is on internal parts that I've, you know, scuffed off the allodyne like this, I'm just going to touch it up with some zinc phosphate primer before I put the skin on. That should take care of any bare spots that have the allodyne removed. Okay, so I'm going to do this side, and then I'll flip it over and I'll do the other side, and we should be getting close to being able to glue the skin on. So I finished gluing in all the little filler pieces that go on top of the spar between the front and the rear ribs. And now what I'm going to do is go through and just trim those off to make the the front and the rear ribs transition across the spar here. And I found the best way to do that is to just use, this is actually a scraping razor blade for like a vinyl floor scraper. And what I do is I just hold this in parallel across the rib here, and using two hands I just cut it off this way, and then I usually come back the other way, cut it off that way, and you can get almost every time a really nice transition. If there's a little bump there, just use a little bit of sandpaper to just clean it up. But I'm going to go on both sides of all these ribs and get all of these trimmed off and cleaned up. And I just finished one side of this, knocking off these filled in areas. This is what it should look like. It should be perfectly smooth transition with your finger across between the front and the rear rib. And I did just use the razor blade like I mentioned, which worked really well. Just cut it off the front and back, and I just wrapped some sandpaper around a scrap 1/4 inch piece of aluminum that I have here, and just ran across between them just like this, just to make sure that I get a good transition, because we want to limit the amount of bump that shows up when we glue the skin on here when we're all done. We don't want to end up with high spots right there. And I'll show you what I did here. I mentioned before I had kind of a low spot right here on this end part of the rib where I had intended on putting the filler piece of aluminum on top of this and bonding it in so I didn't have to put the rivets on the top side. And I ended up deciding not to do that because I was hitting the skin here and all the way across the back, and at basically these other 3 spots it was hitting too, and so the only short spot I had was here. And I just decided not to mess with trying to redo those ribs because I was just afraid with how difficult these were to make and get in position correctly the first time that I was just going to create other problems trying to fix it. So I did just put a little bit of the rib material on top of here and sanded it down smooth. So now I have a smooth transition from this rib across here, across the spar and down. It's perfectly smooth. So again, I think that'll fix that. It's all just going to be bonded, and then there'll be pop rivets through this anyway. So I thought that was a fair enough fix for this very, very minor issue. And as long as the skin is transitioning smoothly when it's glued, that's all that really matters. I just finished the remaining things that I had to do to prep this for gluing. I sanded off all the metal areas on the ribs that are going to get glue. The other thing I did is I touched up this little spot where I had to sand away the iodine, where I fixed a small dent that I created. Just wanted to make sure that I covered up any bare aluminum on the spar before it's covered. The other thing I did is, I don't know if you can see it here, is I actually covered the ends of this, wrapped it in tape. I did want to make sure that I didn't glue this rib to the form here. The other thing I did is I added a piece of wire that goes through the hole on the end that was originally for lining the ribs, and just put a little loop on the end of it just to tighten it to keep this rib snug against the frame here. It wanted to bend away from and not stay attached there. I think once I start vacuum bagging, it might start moving in. I just wanted a way to pull it back out. So let's see. I think that was pretty much all I had left to do. I should be ready to glue this. Now I am having some issues with the skin that I'm a little bit concerned about. When I put the skin on top of here, it fits really tight in the corners on the ends. But in the center here, it takes quite a bit of force to squeeze it into the proper shape here. It rests on top here properly and it lays across, but it seems like it's not bent enough in the center. And part of that is when you're bending the aluminum, you're pushing it down in the center, you're creating that radius, but it bends easier on the ends because there's no aluminum on the other side of that, trying to, that it has to bend in conjunction with it. So there seems to be a little bit less of a radius bend on the center part of the skin than there is on the ends. And I don't like the amount of tension that it actually takes to push this together here in the center. The vacuum bagging process would probably pull it together, it would probably glue it together, but I don't want it to debond. And I just don't want it to have that extra stress in there. So I'm going to try and bend that skin a little bit more in the center. And then once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and lay it on top of here. I'll test fit it one last time, and then I'll test the vacuum bagging process and make sure that everything's going to get pulled down nice and tight. So that's the only thing I'm going to do right now before I put the skin on to do our test vacuum bagging, and then we'll glue it. The other thing I did want to mention here with this framework that we're gluing this on, this is not 100% straight. And by that, what I mean is there seems to be a small amount of twist in it. And I mean really, really minor. But I am going to make sure that I get that possible twist out of it before it's glued. Once it's glued, it can't be fixed. And obviously it's straight across the bottom. The trailing edge is going to be nice and straight in this case. But I don't want the airfoil itself to be even twisted, you know, a quarter of a degree. So if I lay a digital level across the end here, and then I go down to the other end and put a digital level, it is off by, I think, maybe even a half a degree. And I do want to make sure that I get that out of there while this is drying. And so I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do that. These little braces I have in here are just sitting in here. I might be able to just screw all those in and get it tightened up. I may have to put a shim and a clamp underneath each side just to make sure that it's twisted back into its perfectly straight configuration while it's drying. But that's another thing you're going to want to make sure if you're gluing this, is to make sure that your frame is actually straight. Don't just assume that it is. I went ahead and put the tabletop that I had on top of here again, clamped this down just like I did before, and flattened this skin a little bit more. And because I didn't really have anything thinner to use as a stop when we were folding down to create this radius, what I did is I just kept moving this board further and further and further away as I put pressure on and hit that stop. Just moving it further away made it so that obviously the amount of height here would change because of the angle. So I flattened this considerably more. This looks like it's going to fit much better over the top of the horizontal stabilizer. I think what I need to make sure of is when I put the skin on, when I try and get around these bearing supports, I just have to make sure that I don't stretch the skin back out too much and make sure that I keep it tight in the middle here and don't bend it back out. But this looks much better. I think this will fit much better. Now I'm going to go ahead and put it back onto the ribs and go ahead and test the vacuum bagging process and make sure that that's all going to work. Then we're going to glue it. Okay, I set the skin back on top of here. It does fit much tighter on the top, so I'm very glad that I decided to bend that a little bit further. However, I do still have an issue with where these bearing supports come through, because I can't put the skin on here and then just pull it over the top of those bearing supports, because I made it so that there's, you know, 0.5 millimeter of distance around the cutouts here. So it's designed to be slipped onto those and then flipped over the top. The problem is there's almost no way for me to glue this together without messing it all up when I go to put the skin on, because I'll put the glue on all the ribs, I'll set this on there, I'll have to have it touching the ribs, and then I'll have to pop it over this, and then I'll have to slide it over the top. I'm gonna mess up the glue all over the place. So I think what I am gonna do here is I'm gonna notch these out down below here so that when I set this on here, I can just push the skin over the top of these fittings. And I think that's the lesser of the two evils here of trying to figure out how to get this glued on and get a good glue application and installation of the skin without messing that up, but still being able to get it over the fittings. I've tried before to actually put it over the fittings first, but then what happens is the top pointy part of the skin here will actually hit all of these ribs here when I'm pushing it over, and it actually needs to pop over the top because it doesn't want to conform to that angle at this point. So again, I'm just going to notch these out, make it so that the skin fits on here. Once it's all the way down, it'll just pop right over the top. And I'm not too concerned about it because I believe that's what these straps that go on here are for, and why they need to fit tight on the back and the front. The fact that the skin doesn't fit tight on the back, I don't think is going to be a problem, because that's what this is going to take care of when we put those on. So I'm going to go ahead and notch this out some more, and then I'll go ahead and test vacuum bagging it on here. Okay, I finished drilling out the holes here to their final size for the bolts that are going to have to fit in here for the fitting that goes on. What I had to do with these is I drilled them out, but then I just kept making them a little bit bigger until I saw the edge of the hole behind the skin, and then was able to move these, you know, one direction or another, actually with a round file, just to make sure I didn't make the holes any bigger than they needed to, and make sure they were aligned up or aligned with the you know, rivet nuts that are on the other side. Okay, so the other thing I want to show you here too, I've got just the skin laid on here, and I've just got it pulled down with some rubber bands here that aren't all that tight. But you'll notice that I actually have a nice tight fit now here, which I didn't have before I continued to rebend this skin. So what I'm very, very happy with now is that not only do I have a nice snug fit here on the ends, but even in the middle, it's actually pulled against all of the ribs, which I can feel inside of here, which is what I want. I just didn't want that extra tension to have to be in there, but now it's laying perfectly flat like it should. So now I'm just going to put the vacuum bag on here and hook up the vacuum cleaner and test and see that everything looks okay and that I can seal this properly. And then I'll get some glue on these ribs. So it's actually taken me a couple of hours to get to the point where I feel comfortable vacuum bagging this horizontal tail assembly. I ran into several problems. Number one is I had these rubber bands held in here with just some drywall screws. The drywall screws were too long, so they ended up, the plastic ended up getting holes poked in it by the screws, so I had to replace all those with shorter screws. I ended up cutting some tubing, I think it's 1/4 inch air hose, and I just ran air passageways across the top and between each one of these support pieces so that I could get air to flow through the vacuum bag to the other side here. I'm trying to attach the vacuum on that side and then check on this side with our tubing that's filled with wine there to determine if I've got the right amount of suction. But getting the air to flow through the bag, it was almost impossible, because what would happen is it would just suck tight somewhere on this side with the vacuum, and then the air would never get down to here. So just putting those tubes in there at least allowed air to not only flow through the tube, but it would create a small passage around the outside. Now I think one of the problems I'm having here is I think I'm using too thin of a bag material. I really should be using a much thicker mill thickness of plastic, and I think that's part of my problem. This is just sucking so tight around the rubber bands and around everything that it's sealing itself off before the air gets throughout the entire, or the vacuum at least gets throughout the entire bag. But I have gotten to the point now where I'm able to get my almost 12 inches of suction here on this end with the vacuum being attached to the other end. So I at least feel comfortable that I can make this work. Also, clamping off plastic, that does not work. You really have to tape everywhere. Any place you have plastic on top of plastic and you want it to seal, it's got to be taped. I tried to, I've got some things to try and go around down here. I got these rods coming out, and again, trying to seal around this and not have any leaks is very difficult. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take this apart. I'm going to go ahead and glue this and put the skin back on, and then it might take me a little bit of time to figure out how to get this bag to seal properly, but I've got plenty of time with the glue that I'm using, that I should have plenty of time to get it situated and vacuum bagged before I have any issues with the epoxy. I just walked in this morning. This has been vacuum bagging for about 12 hours. I was maintaining this, I don't know if you can see it down there, the tube that has the wine in it. There was about 10 inches of difference between the height on those while this was being vacuum bagged. And this is actually in my office area. I had to set up a table in here and set this up and do the vacuum bagging and gluing in my office because this is the only place that has heat. And it's been actually kind of cold here in Southern California, so I've had to try and do this indoors here, at least inside the office area and not out in the shop. The shop's probably about 55 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the plastic off of this and I'm going to try and pull this out of this framework. I've got the rods that are in the end here that have to be pulled out, and this has to be slipped out of this framework. It's going to be a little bit tough because I know I have some glue here in the little notch that I put in here for where the front and the rear ribs come together. You know, I did put tape around some of this, but it's going to be a little bit of a tight squeeze to get this off. Now once this is off, we'll be able to glue the last half. I basically glued down to where this rod is where I tried to get to, and then what I'll end up doing is we'll spread apart the back and we'll glue the ribs on the end and then clamp it together again on this table, and we'll vacuum bag it one more time. This vacuum bagging process was quite frustrating for me. I really had difficulty getting the air to continuously flow through the bag. It's the only way that you can get the suction the same on this end as it is on the far end. You know, here I had a bunch of issues trying to seal around all these rods sticking out because every place the rod was sticking out, you couldn't bunch it together, you couldn't tape it. So again, that was probably my biggest frustration with gluing this yesterday, was just getting this bag to seal. And you know, I probably spent an hour going around it and just finding other areas where I could seal it off. Just so I could get enough vacuum pressure continuously on it with the shop vac. And I did get to the point where I was able to go back to the dial that I have here on the floor and I was able to adjust that down to medium in order to get the correct pressure that I wanted to. So I was able to take a little bit of pressure off the shop vac, and I was actually a little bit surprised and happy to find out that it was still running this morning when I came in. I was half thinking that somewhere in the middle of the night that thing was going to die. But anyway, let me see if I can get this thing out of here, and we'll start gluing the rear. I moved this back out to the shop just to give myself some more space. I didn't have enough room even in my office to pull these rods out. I'm now regretting removing these rods at this point because this is not coming off of this wooden form. There's just too much friction with all the ribs in there that it's just not wanting to come loose. If I still had these rods in there, I'd at least be able to put some pressure up on the sides here to try and lift it up and have something that was going all the way through and connecting the ribs together. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do. I might actually put one or two of these back in just so I have something to grab onto, because right now I have nothing to grab onto to pull this off. And I've got to kind of, I think, wiggle it up a little bit on each side, and I certainly don't want to debond the glue joint that I already have in here. So yeah, I'm going to play around with this and see if I can get this thing off of here. Alright, quick update. So I was able to put one of these rods back through here just by hand, and that did give me enough leverage to pull up on each side. So I've actually moved this up about a ½ inch on each side. It seems to be coming off now, so I don't think I'll have any problem getting it the rest of the way off. So I'm just keep wiggling it on either side until it pops all the way off. All right, I got it out, and it looks great. Yeah, it looks perfect. I got a little bit of glue blob on my fitting here. I just got to pop that off. A little bit of cleanup around there. Yeah, this looks great. I'm going to see if I can show you what it looks like inside of here. Hopefully you can see down in here with the light. Yeah. So you can see down in there, I got a nice glue joint in there, and then you can also see the gap between the skin and the spar, which is why we have to put those little filler pieces between the front and the rear ribs that goes over the spar, because we, you know, the skin is taking the flight loads and transferring those to the ribs. The ribs then are transferring the stress and loads to the spar, and of course the spar is transferring those loads to these attach fittings. So you know, we don't glue the skin directly on top of the spar. But yeah, this looks great. All right, I'm going to start preparing this to glue the trailing edge half, and we'll just put glue down on all these ribs and clamp this down along the back. And yeah, we'll set up the second gluing procedure. Okay, so I've just done a little bit of prep work prior to gluing the back half of the horizontal stabilizer here. I cut out 3 of these 1-inch MDF wooden strips. I screwed one into my tabletop that I'm kind of just using as a gluing station here, and I positioned that so that I could stick one of these on the end. And these 1-inch strips are designed to fit underneath the vertical fin like so when it's glued, so that we can clamp it here on the back side. So what we're going to do is apply glue to all the ribs. We're going to apply glue across the back, and then we're going to take another board and set it on top of here like so, and we can just clamp this then together on the table while the glue dries. We're also going to vacuum bag this. So I'm just trying to get some of these little things ready to go. And on the trailing edge here, I did sand along here about 10 millimeters in where the flat spot's supposed to be, all the way along the trailing edge. So I'm at the point now where I'm ready to glue this. So I'm just going to tip this up, and I'm going to apply glue to all of the tails of all the ribs inside of there and across the trailing edge. We'll clamp this down together and vacuum bag it, and we'll leave it overnight. Once that is done, then the final gluing is finished. Then what we'll do when that's done tomorrow is I'll come back and I'll put those straps that go in here that get pop riveted into place. Those are almost ready to go, and once I pop rivet those on, this will be done. So I'm going to go ahead and do the gluing right now on this. I'll take a video when it's done. I'm not going to film it while I'm putting the glue on. I don't have a lot of space to work in my office here at this table, so I'm just going to try and get this done and get this clamped. And once I get the vacuum bagging started, I will start the video back up. But I also have to be very careful here on this end. When I put that vacuum cleaner on here, I don't want it to push this rib in. I don't want it to suck this side in, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of planning, or at least playing around with getting the vacuum cleaner hose connected on this side to do the vacuum bagging. It's pretty stiff up here where it's been glued, and I do have the spar in here, so I may come in this direction, and I want that air to suck through these 4 holes in here so it flows down the center of this thing and kind of sucks it down. But yeah, I just want to make sure these ribs stay flush on the outside when this is clamped together. I may have to do a little bit of playing around with that too. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get the glue on here, and we'll see how the vacuum bagging goes when I get to that point. I just set this with the trailing edge up, and I just used some spacers that I had. These were just leftover cutoffs of foam that I had laying in the shop. I'm just using those to separate the aft portion here, and then you can see where we got to get the glue down each one of these ribs. I'm going to use the same technique I did before. Just used a plastic tie strap just to get down in there along the ribs, and we'll get them coated with glue, and then I'll pull these out, and then we'll put some glue across the trailing edge and clamp it down. Should be pretty straightforward. It's very similar to what I did on the vertical fin and the rudder already. But yeah, let me get some glue on these. The shop this morning, and I pulled this out of the vacuum bag, and it looks like it glued just fine. Now My shop vac was not running this morning, so it died somewhere in the middle of the night. I'm not too concerned about it because I was here for at least 2 hours from the time that I applied the glue, and by the time I was leaving, the glue was already starting to set. In addition to that, I can look down the side of this and look at the reflections, and I can see the ribs. Just a slight ripple of the ribs in the aluminum skin, which is kind of normal after it's been vacuum bagged and glued. It seems to slowly disappear over time, but the fact that I can see those ribs tells me that I got at least a tight enough glue joint between the ribs and the skin, so that seems fine, but it looks like I might need to buy a new shop vac. Okay, so now we only have a couple things left to finish. I do have some cleanup I have to do with the trailing edge, just run around it with some sandpaper. I got some glue I need to clean up on the ends here that's kind of sticking out on the ribs, and that kind of came out the side. But what we're going to do is work on these straps here that go on either side of these fittings that come out. And then there's, I think, 8 pop rivets, maybe it's 10 on the top side that need to be put into those ribs. And I'm still going to go back now and use that template that I made that fit over this, that located these bolt holes for the attached fitting here, and to be able to cut these holes in here, and that will allow me to align those rivet holes on top. And as far as aligning these on the bottom, as long as I get these straps in here straight, they should be fine. I've already cut the holes around these fittings, so I'm just going to measure down at the bottom from each end to make sure that I have those positioned straight, and I'll go ahead and get all the holes drilled for those. And so yeah, I'm going to just start finishing cleaning up in here a little bit, and then I'm going to get to work on those straps. So I'm starting the process of installing these straps, or doublers. I'm not exactly sure what these are called. I did want to comment on a few things that I figured out here. I had to notch out the back side of this strap so that it would fit flat over the top of this fitting. And if you look at the fittings here, this is just a rough cut blank set that I had. You'll see that in this corner here, there's this radius in here, and this was cut with a 1/4 inch end mill, and so the radius then of this area here is about 3.2 millimeters. 6 1/4 would be a 1/4 inch, which is the drill bit that's used. But this radius here is what sticks out of the bottom of the skin, and so the skin is almost flush. There's a little bit of a gap between the bottom of this fitting and where the skin actually ends up, but we've got 3.2 millimeters of radius that sticks out of this corner down here, and that radius will catch and hit the skin, and will also catch and hit these fittings that go here. Once you get to the top of the strap, it's pretty much covered at that point, but from there down, if you don't compensate for that radius being in there and that curvature there, you can, I think, end up with the skin not fitting flush with the ribs right at these fittings. That can cause a fit problem with the skin, and that can cause a fit problem with this doubler that goes over the top of here. And I'm not so sure that isn't why some people have had issues with these rivets that get installed here hitting the top of the vertical fin when it's installed. So when you install the vertical fin, this onto the vertical fin, you put the bolts through here, you'll actually find that the vertical fin hits these rivets. And some people have had to either grind them off, some people have put countersunk rivets in here to try and prevent that from happening. I actually have measured, and I don't believe if I were to install a normal non-countersunk rivet here, I don't believe mine would hit. But I have, made sure that I cut out the skin a little bit around those, those radiuses here. I also made sure that I notched out the bottom of these when they're installed so that it would clear it, and this actually then will sit flat and flush with the skin. So that's definitely one thing to watch out for. Now I am going to do 2 modifications here that are not in the plans. First of all, we're not, according to the plans, required to put countersunk rivets in here. However, I am going to install countersunk rivets on all of these locations. They're 1/8 inch rivets, And the reason that it's okay to do that here, or at least I believe it's okay to do that, is that this material is thick enough that we can countersink these rivets in here without requiring us to dimple this piece of aluminum or the panel behind it. And as long as we don't have to dimple this panel because the countersunk is not thick enough to go through completely through this material, we should be able to install a countersunk rivet here at these locations. That will also prevent me having any issues with these rivets on either side of where these fittings are bolted in. But the other thing that I am going to do is I'm going to glue these straps down. Now these straps, if you followed my video of the vertical fin, these straps are the same thickness that are on the top of the vertical fin that go along the sides where these bolt through on the vertical fin. We installed countersunk rivets on those straps. There's no reason that we can't install them on this strap here. Now, it may not be aerodynamically required because a lot of this is underneath the top of the vertical fin. There's a lot of turbulence of air around here. I'm sure it's not a slipstream issue where we, should be installing or need to install countersunk rivets, but we can, so why not? And like I said, I am going to put glue underneath. I'm going to epoxy these down. It's not required. It doesn't mention that in the manual. However, this is a prime place for moisture, water, debris, things to get between these two pieces of metal and cause corrosion over time. So I'm just going to put glue underneath this just to seal it and make sure that there's no gaps in between the aluminum. So those are the two changes I'm making. I've got this one pretty much drilled and ready to go. These are only 3/32. Clicos, I have to drill all these holes out to 1/8 inch. Then I'll go ahead and countersink these holes in both of these straps, and we'll get them glued and pop riveted into place. I keep reminding myself to remember to take the clear plastic off the top of this metal before I glue these. That's one of the things I would probably forget, and go ahead and glue them down to the plastic. That would be bad. The other thing we are going to do with these straps is they can be aerodynamically edged or tapered on the side. That is in the plans, so they do recommend that you do that, but they don't necessarily require or recommend that you install countersunk pop rivets. I'm not really sure why. It seems to solve a lot of issues here. It's a little bit extra work, but not enough to not do it. So I'm getting ready to glue these down now. I went ahead and countersunk all the holes. I got these all cleaned up. I kind of rounded the edges just to blend them in a little bit. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some blue tape around the outside of these straps, and I'm going to do that so that I can pull the strap off and just scuff up the aluminum on the actual airfoil surface here on the skin, so that when I bond these together and glue underneath it, I get a good bond between the strap here and the skin. I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll get some glue on here and pop rivet these in place. Alright, I quickly just drilled these 3/32 rivet holes on the top here and put those pop rivets in. So we're basically done now, with the exception of we got just the trailing edge safety rivets that need to be installed. So I'm going to go ahead and mark and drill those next and get those installed. I'm just finishing up the security rivets that are on the trailing edge here. And these security rivets, the purpose of those is to just prevent the trailing edge from wanting to separate. The gluing process or the epoxying of the skin is good for shearing stresses, but it's not good for stripping stresses. So if this edge were to lift, it would be fairly easy to rip it off, but by putting these security rivets in here, it just prevents that from possibly starting. It also helps too if the ribs were to become delaminated from the skin, that at least this would be held in the back together and provide some additional support. But what I did want to show you with these is you want to cut these things really, really short. I mean, they need to go through the skin, obviously, but we want to actually pull these. And I'm using, by the way, I'm using just a rivet squeezer to do this, and I've got that adjusted down for these short rivets. Let me show you here, see if we can show you. Yeah, so you can see this one here. You just want to barely pull them because this 16,000 skin on this horizontal stabilizer is really thin, and what happens if you try and pull these like you would a normal rivet, it will really, really distort the skin on the outside here. In fact, I'll show you maybe in another video, but my vertical fin, I ended up pulling those a little bit too tight, and even my rudder, I pulled those a little bit too tight. So you want to pull them to the point where you get the other side of it, squished with the rivet squeezer, but not enough that it actually starts to distort the skin. It just aesthetically looks better that way. So I've got one left here I got to put in the corner here, and I'm just going to put in the last one, and then I've got all the security rivets in place. So I've got a few cleanup things that I need to finish on the horizontal stabilizer here. Now that I have the security rivets in the trailing edge, I'm just going to take a sanding block and just go along the trailing edge and just clean up some of the glue that's coming out of the edge. I'm also going to round this corner just a little bit just to take the sharp point off of there. I'm not going to worry about rounding this too much because I might want to shape this a little more when I put the fiberglass wingtips on here at some point when I get to the point of making those. The other thing I have is I've got some glue sticking out of the edges here. I just want to run along the sides and just clean up the glue with a sanding block. The other thing that we need to do is I'm going to clean up these rivet heads a little bit. I just got a little bit of a sharp edge where they were popped through, so I'm just going to sand these down just a little bit, clean those up. And we still need to finish the fitting that goes here for the elevator controls. And that's similar to this fitting here. We just have to finish rounding the corners, allodyne it, glue the bearing in and spot stamp it, and then bolt it on here. But once those things are done, we should be finished with this. So I'm just going to get to the cleanup process, and then we'll come back and we'll work on the fitting here that goes on the nose. All right, I finished some of the cleanup stuff that I was planning on doing. I just sanded the ends of the horizontal here. There's still a little bit of residual glue on here. I'm not going to sand this anymore until I'm ready to actually start fitting the wing tips that go on here. And I just lightly rounded the corner here, and I sanded off the trailing edge until I made sure that I could see both edges of the skin on the edge, so I had a nice straight edge there, and then I just rounded the edge slightly. I went back just over these rivets, and I just knocked the high edges off of the pop rivets that go in here, smooth this out a little bit. And then the last thing I did was I cleaned out these bolt holes underneath here to make sure that there wasn't any glue left in there, and I just fit the 4 bolts in here for this front fitting that needs to be finished next. And I did want to show you, now that I have the bolts in here, I think you can see, hopefully on the bottom, you can see there's curvature of the skin underneath that fitting, and what we have to do is actually shape the bottom of that fitting to the contour of the skin. So we're just supposed to gently, put that in maybe a drum sander or something like that, and just curve the bottom of that fitting so that it fits smooth with the skin, so that when we bolt it down, it's perfectly flat following the curvature of the front of the horizontal stabilizer. So that's what I'm going to work on next, is that fitting. I need to round all the corners on it. I need to allodyne it. I'm going to glue and spot stamp the bearing in and shape the bottom of it. And once that's all ready, we'll just be able to bolt this right to the front of the horizontal stabilizer, and that shouldn't have to ever really come off unless it needs to be replaced. So that's what I'm going to work on next, and that's the final piece that we need to finish in order to have the horizontal stabilizer completely done. All right, I finished the front push rod fitting for the horizontal stabilizer. I got this spot stamped in and glued in place, and I went ahead and just put my 4 bolts in that I needed to secure this with, and that shouldn't need to come off. But the fit looks great. Very happy with that, and that was the last thing we needed to do to finish this horizontal stabilizer.